for this environmental education program where he recruits high school youth from the area to be paid environmental educators at this local park called Cobb's Creek. So, that was an opportunity that I saw, as a 17-year-old. I was like, I can earn money while I learn. I was like, that's a really great idea. I know nothing about the environment, but I'm not against it. It's fine. And my first assignment was it's kind of like a book report. You get a book report, except it was for birds. So for us, we had to look in the Sibley, look in the Peterson, look in the Crosley, look in the Audubon, all the guides, and figure out, what we can about this bird. And then we would come back the next week and report on it, what we know about it, where we could find it. And for me, it was the next week that I came back to work that I got to see a belted kingfisher female on top of a cattail do its call while it was crossing the creek. And when I was present for that moment, I realized that there's something happening. Like for me, I was going to college to be a math teacher. I was studying specifically mathematics, computer science, and teaching. Turns out I'm not very good at math or computer science, but I enjoyed learning it. But environmental education, or at least interpreting ecology through birds, was something that I started to build a practice in, because most of the job was engaging the public, and the public was the West Philadelphia community of the Cobbs Creek neighborhood, the same neighborhood where the move bombing happened 35 years earlier, the same neighborhood that has a legacy of neglect from the city of Philadelphia, and a history of obviously police violence in that neighborhood as well. So it's when we're telling our neighbors, or when I was telling my neighbors at the time, that we should go in the park to watch birds, the first thing they think about when they think about that park isn't birds. So it was clear that you know there are strong relationships between people and parks, and that's something that I took away from that experience, that I helped apply when randomly a state representative called me via Facebook to ask if I could be her scheduler. She was looking for a new staff person, someone to manage her schedule. And when she saw my resume and saw that I was an environmental educator for a couple years, she offered me the opportunity to advise her in environmental policy. And then that kind of opened up the world of environmental advocacy to me, and specifically environmental advocacy with bird watching as a vehicle. And that really came to home when I started working with the National Audubon Society starting in November of 2018. I started working with them, with my special role being organizing bird walks with members of Congress. That's something that I haven't done directly yet, for multiple reasons. First reason, it's just I don't need to be the person on the ground doing the bird walk. They're the constituents, the bird walk leaders, the local leaders are so much better at that than I am. But also, you know, what I'm able to do is just coordinate it, and that makes it a lot easier. So that for the most part, all you have to take is some talking points and do your thing, do your bird walk with your member of Congress. But it is something that I do at congressional staff very often, or at least I did before I broke my ankle in January. Once a month, I would take out congressional staff to Bathaldi Park, which is across the street from the U.S. Botanic Gardens, which is a really, really great spot for birds. And when they saw on the eBird list that I cracked the top 5 with checklists, because not enough. I mean, it's just like the people who go there the most work there. So like, there's 2 or 3 of them that are in like the 100s with checklists. And then like I broke into 20, because I would also go there in my free time. But when I broke, into that top 5, they realized that I was doing it at 8 a.m. when the botanical gardens normally open at 9 a.m. And they saw that I was coming by with a group of congressional staff, and they thought that was a good opportunity for them. So they started opening up sooner, just so we could come through and be like the first people in the garden. And, like it's really quiet and really, really pristine. So that's something that I always talk about when I'm thinking that bird watching has always been my job, but it's always been an experience, the way I've been able to build relationships, the way I've been able to engage with nature and not just consume it. And obviously, it's something that I think makes birders special when it comes down to their role as advocates when we're talking about what Congress needs to do or what Harrisburg needs to do to, help us recover from this pandemic and to, promote economic stimulus in the most environmentally friendly way possible. For me, it's always made sense that, um, you know, or not made sense, but in my head, birding has always been a job. So the idea of it being a hobby or something like a recreational sport was new to me in the scope of like, there are people who do this that don't get paid, and there's people who do this because actually they have enough money to just spend time watching birds all day, and that there also is a strong cultural barrier between what the birding community has been and what it should be. And I know that most of my bird watching happened in the city of Philadelphia, where I know, and now my birding is done a lot in DC, but I know I feel safe when I'm birding in the city. But when my friends are like, "Hey, there's a Susie tail flycatcher just out, way out somewhere else," and I'm like, "I don't know if I want to go. I don't know if I'm always gonna feel safe to chase that rarity if we're going outside the city." And I do recognize that, even as somebody who works in policy who hopes that conservation outcomes can be for everyone, some parts, and I think a major part of the environmental movement recognizes that it has not been able to bring everybody along. And I think a large part of the environmental movement may reconcile, may need to reconcile, like the Sierra Club, its racist, anti-Black, anti-immigrant past. And we're at a moment that is triggered by some very high profile social media events like Black Birders Week, like from the situation, the racial incident with Christian Cooper where the white woman tried to weaponize the police, the murders of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. We know that we're at a racial reckoning in this country. I think I've heard a lot of people say. And the coronavirus has been a catalyst to, question, to critique, and to even, in some ways change the economic order. And I think that, as crazy as it sounds, I think birders have a very important role in this time to say what our futures can and should be. Birding, watching birds, I think has the ability to connect with people everywhere. I mean, I'm not telling anybody anything new. Most of you are together because of your love for birds. And if we think that that's something that other people can have, other people should have, then I think that as a community, we should feel responsible in making sure that we're being as inclusive as possible and that we're seeking equitable outcomes in what we're doing as birding groups and birding institutions, National Audubon included. I've said before that, this is a very important time for birders, but for environmental organizations at large. They have to recognize that they cannot achieve their environmental progress. They cannot achieve environmental progress if they are not combating anti-Black racism and white supremacy where it exists. And there's a lot of ways that you can do it, and there's a lot of ways that it's pervasive. And it is, in some ways difficult or even uncomfortable to have the conversation about shifting power, because the honest truth is the status quo is unsustainable for the birding community. If this intergenerational, this beautiful exercise of how we engage with nature, if this is something that only belongs to a minority of people who may have historically had good intentions, but disproportionate and unjust results, then this is why we have to think now in this moment, what can we do as a birding community to make sure that this is something that future generations can enjoy, and something that when future generations are looking at what we're doing today, they have something to be proud of. think that's a good place to start. I want to welcome this to be a conversation as well. From organizing Black Birders Week to having, my own podcast and working to um, meet the environmental moment when we're talking about important policies that we're focusing on in Congress, and potentially also what's happening in Pennsylvania. I would love to have dialogue on those things. And also, I would like to know more about you, because this is also just helpful for me to get to know more people. Because it's not like we can just go out and then like have the happy hour reception after this. So very open.
Makes sense, Tykee. I think what we wanted to hear from you is how do we break those barriers, right? What's your experience um, as a black birder? Was there any, hindrances to join clubs, go out in the nature, or any barriers to those resources? If we can talk about that a little bit, I think others will join in and ask questions. But I thought I would start this conversation.
All right. Well, thank you. That's a really great question. Now, like I said, birding for me has been a job majority of the time. And because of that, I essentially have like the hosting power of how the bird walk goes and how inclusivity is demonstrated. So often on my own bird walks, I can say that I don't feel that there's an issue with me feeling alienated from the folks that I'm doing a bird walk with, or at least my intention, at least what the effect has been, and from feedback, I don't think anyone else has had the impression of being alienated on a bird walk, when I'm doing it for work. Where I've found issue has been the birding festivals, really, where it's a large part of the birding community coming together, and for some people it's literally their first time seeing a black birder. And not that it gives them no excuse, but because of that, they feel licensed to say things that they may not mean derogatorily, but it is definitely taken as a pejorative. When you call me a rare bird, like it's kind of cute to say, and like I kind of get what you mean by it, but that's not my name. That's not why I'm here. I'm not here to be your rare bird sighting. I'm actually here to hopefully see one. And so the approach of probative or over curious, oh, how did you get into birding? When it's like anyone should be able to get into birding, almost like the Jackie Robinson effect. It can be a double-edged sword, where now, because I'm the black birder on the bird walk, I'm, carrying the burden of everything everyone is going to think about the black community, or I'm carrying the burden of your first interaction with a black birder. And now I have to, not necessarily conduct myself as Tykee, but no, I'm now, pigeonholed, if you will, as a black birder, when, I just want to be watching birds like everybody else. I know I'm black, I don't need to be reminded. Outside of that, the interpersonal, microaggressions that can be alienating and then present a barrier to the full experience, to full participation of birding. Outside of that, I think that, from what I've seen, there isn't a birding organization that isn't willing to figure out how to get out free binoculars. There isn't an organization that isn't looking for a younger audience to come in. I think that a lot of the barriers that present this deficit in diversity for the birding community is really based in the interpersonal interactions, not so much in the institutional. But I think that the culture of the birding community is going through a shift, and some of that reason is because of Black Birders Week that took place. Some of that reason is because everything's over Zoom now, and the entire, everyone is figuring out how to bird from home, not just work from home. And I think that that's gonna make a really neat maybe not level playing field. I don't want to say, you know, something as specific as that, but something to that effect where now there's probably a starting point that an entire generation can have into birding, and that can be something that, you know, again, looking back, what are future generations going to see in this moment about what our actions were and what our decisions were and what our visions were. um I mean, and you know, when you are either a host of a bird walk or a participant of a bird walk, you know, there are things that you can do in that interpersonal realm that can be alienating and that can present barriers to people. Some of the basic things, language, you know, if you are, you know, in a potentially multilingual, multicultural audience and you only know English, that may present you at a disadvantage. Or, you know, if you only have field guides that are only in English, that may be an issue in itself. Or sign language interpretation, you know, there's just a lot of ways you can open up your inclusivity drawer, the tools of inclusivity, so to speak, to see what accommodations you can make to bring in folks who experience life differently or folks who come from different backgrounds.
Thank you, Tykee.
Well, you mentioned the word microaggressions. The timid side of me says, rather than committing microaggressions that I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing, maybe I should just avoid the whole thing. That is cowardly. I get that. But I'm wondering if I'm understanding right. A simple thing like saying, hello, did you see any good birds? Is that a good segue?
I think so. Actually, I had this question that came from a man in Colorado, white man in Colorado. You know, he has this eBird hotspot that he likes going to, and he recognized somebody went up in the leadership category of that, you know, and, you know, he clicks on the profile and it turns out to be a black woman. And he's just like, I'm so excited that it's a black woman, but I also don't want to be excited that it's a black woman because I'm a white man that's a stranger, and that would be very weird. And he asked me, how should I approach that person? You know, like, how do I, you know, I'm number one on the leadership board, so, you know, that exists as a thing, but I'm also a white dude in this world that technically keeps me on the leadership board anyway. um, you know, how would I address? I haven't given him an answer to that question. I think that's such an interesting question, one that requires a lot of awareness, because I think that's ultimately what defines human decency. How aware are you of your own actions, and insofar that you can control them and be accountable for? I like to think, and I figured this out early on, I am never going to do anything that I don't have the intention to do. You know, if I really do make a mistake, if I really do something that messes things up, you know, I can be accountable to that because I know what my actions are. I never want to be in a situation where I didn't know what I was doing. I don't want to be in a situation where I'm saying things that I don't know what I'm saying. You know, but if I am, I will try to preface, hey, I don't know what I'm saying when I say this, but this is what I want to say. And where it goes is, you know, based on where it goes. I mean, that's the most common question I think you find out in the field. Seen any good birds? Um, but again, it's about awareness and how introspective you can be sometimes in the moment, or maybe, you know, more generally in the field. And, you know, some of this does go to what have your experience been like in the field? You know, how do you feel when people approach you and ask you some of those questions, or different ways that you feel more comfortable, or different ways you know you would feel uncomfortable? Sometimes asking yourself those questions can help. Wow, is it dry in here? Help figure out what you should do for someone else. That's a great question. I do want to show you guys something cool that I made. But I can take the next question. I just want you to know I'm clicking around to find
I was
something.
just over here. I was just going to say, Tykee, what you need to do, or what we all need to do, is recruit people, recruit minorities to get them interested in birding. So that starts, I would say, with kids, because a lot of adults, they're not interested. You know, if you get kids interested, and I think Stacy can speak to this, you know, the Audubon group, they bring in kids from, I think, from the inner city. And, you know, so are you doing anything on your end to get young people interested?
Absolutely. So I'm on the board of Wyncote Audubon Society and then the DC Audubon Society. So I do a lot of, you know, I help with the outreach. And pre-COVID, whenever we had a table, because that was one of the best ways to really get kids, is to have a table with things that they would come up and like touch and, you know, mess with. So, you know, that's always like a good thing, to have somebody that looks like the community, you know, or just have that your membership is representative of the community that you're serving, and it isn't like a transaction, or it isn't a check mark. I mean, you know, and for example, the DC Audubon Society, actually, we, you know, DC is divided into 8 wards, and, you know, and not necessarily baked in our mission, but baked in our purpose is to do a bird walk in every single ward. And like, that's one thing we do to like check off the list, but how we do those bird walks and like the quality of relationships are something that's always an ongoing conversation with the board, because we don't want to be transactional. We want to make sure that the relationships and the opportunities that we have are strategic and follow our mission, and, you know, are supported by our donors. So that's the thing about it, you know, that it's a constant thing that you're doing. It's not something that you're just doing for February because it's Black History Month, or something that you're not just doing for the beginning of June because it's Black Birders Week. It's something that you're doing at all times, and something that, you know, you take seriously in your actions as an organization.
Okay.
One thing, I grew up in North Philly.
Nice. Where at?
Near 17th and Montgomery, around there. You know where that is?
I was born off of 20th and Berks.
Oh, yeah. I was between Montgomery and Berks, and between 17th and 16th.
Wow. Well, and I also went to Temple, so I, you know, there
was right
were
there.
a few parties around those areas, but yeah.
So anyway, I grew up there, and my, you know, like, I was always interested in nature. I was in the Scouts and stuff, but, you know, birding was never, you know, I never even knew about birding until I moved, you know, moved out in the suburbs, and I got more interested in it. But I mean, when I lived in North Philly, if I talked to my friends about birding, they'd look at me like I had 3 eyes. but I think that part of it is the exposure, you know, not having the opportunity, not being exposed to that. I think some of my friends would be interested. Some of them wouldn't, but, you know, and so, I mean, like Marsha was saying, I guess as Bucks Audubon, and Bucks County Birders, our thrust is to try to get more people exposed. And I guess, I mean, you talked about getting young birders exposed, and I guess that's the thing. I guess there was no programs like that when I was growing up, but I guess, I don't know.
We couldn't even get our son to be interested in birding.
Well, I mean, something.
No matter whether they're black or white or what, you can't make them be interested if they're not interested.
Yeah. Some things are gonna be like that, but
you know,
I think that sometimes you can find. I think sometimes you can find really creative ways to connect birds into what they're doing. You know, one thing that I love doing is so there's a video game called Red Dead Redemption. I don't really. Okay, good. You know, I don't really understand, but apparently the games have a very, very accurate portrayal of the birds, and Audubon did an article about it. And that's like one of the few things I talk to Generation Z about, because even I'm like, you know, what are we talking about? You know, we're so different. But it's, I think, and again, think about how your connection to birds and your connection with nature has been formed, and how, you know, one, you appreciate that and you can remember that, but that can be such an individual and such a special thing for somebody else. And the only thing you can really do is facilitate the opportunity. And for me, that opportunity was facilitated in the form of a job. For other people, it might be facilitated when they go to some, you know, community festival, and there's these weird people with binoculars and scopes and like pictures of birds. What is that? And it's just like, oh, I can see these birds in my own neighborhood. And you're like, yeah, you just gotta look or hear or listen, you know. But I think with Zoom and having this ability for folks to be in the same room without being in the same time zone, or, you know, in the same zip code, that is, you can have, I mean, and I tried it before, pros and cons to it. You can have folks in the field doing a bird walk. I mean, it is a little hard to do some of the things that I think would be really helpful. But, you know, one of the things I've tried doing before is, you know, I'll be on Zoom on my phone, you know, so I'll be in selfie mode. And when it's time for me to see a bird, I just bring my, you know, phone up to the binoculars, and sometimes you see it, sometimes you don't, but that's birding, you know. And then you continue to do your talking points and you know, talk about the habitat. I think that's something that can bring a lot of interested people, especially if it's something that you do often, like birding. You know, birding isn't something that you always do to look for something. You're not always chasing a bird. Sometimes you're just out and about just to see what's going on. And you can do that enough and show that it's a practice and that it's a journey, and it's a journey that's enjoyable. I think that there are a lot of creative ways to show that, ways that can be attractive to people of any generation, anyone with an internet connection at least, who can find that accessible and be like, you know, I could probably enjoy this too. And then that's when you get into, you know, binoculars. That's when you get into, you know, going to parks. Like, how do you get to those parks? And, you know, hiking gear, maybe not hiking gear, but, you know, proper equipment, things that make folks feel comfortable, and really getting into how they can feel comfortable in their own way doing this. Because it took me forever to do a bird walk by myself. I did it for work so much. I never did a bird walk just to do it, you know, until like, I think like 2 years ago. And when I did, it was kind of scary, because I was just like, wait, what if I don't know? Nobody will be here, you know? Or what if I see something so cool that no one's here to, you know? So I got over it. Long story short, I got over that part, but it's still something that I think is a goal for somebody to find themselves on a journey into being a birder, to start to realize that this is something that they can do by themselves.
Tykee, if I can talk just a little bit, thank you so much. I don't know anyone in this room because I'm an interloper. I'm on the board of directors of the Washington Crossing Audubon Society, which is in Pennington, New Jersey. I live in Trenton, New Jersey. And I've been on the board for quite a few years. Oh, by the way, Marcia, our kids always made fun of us for birding. And now our daughter, who's 39, lives in Boston, walks in the Arboretum every day and sends us pictures. Said, Dad, what kind of a warbird?
Oh, come on, yeah.
It's going to take a little time. But we are, it's so wonderful. We are trying so seriously to become more diverse, to get a more diverse audience. And we talk amongst ourselves all the time. There are no people of color on our board. We have public meetings once a month. And I can remember maybe seeing two or three people of color ever at any of these meetings. And it's something that distresses me tremendously. But you've already said something that's given me something to kind of really think about. You said a community festival. All we've been talking about is doing just birding stuff, like figure out a way, partnering with local groups in Trenton to have some kind of a meeting between Washington Crossing Audubon. There's a group called Isles, a wonderful, wonderful local group that focuses on the needs of minority youth. And they do some farming things actually. So there's sort of an environmental piece to it. So we're thinking about that. Yeah. You said something else. You talked about like at a community festival, and I never thought about that. And of course, there are always community festivals around. For us to have a presence there, and maybe do a little bit of, you know, showing the flag, that might help us. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think that you should, in the way that you were honest with me about like the lack of diversity being an issue. I think that, you know, what post-coronavirus world we could live in, going to community festivals and saying that birding is relevant to the community, not just birding is relevant to birders, is just a really good baseline for inclusivity. That like birding is something you can do no matter where you are in this city, no matter where you are in your understanding of nature, no matter where you are in your understanding of birds. You know, you can join in at any time, and anywhere, because there's birds in every continent. So that's one. Without having that community, festival ability, I think having, and this is something that actually DC Audubon Society is doing tomorrow. They're having an event that we thought of as a way to have a rolling orientation for birders. And it is that question that was asked earlier. You seen any good birds lately? It's basically that for 30 minutes with, we pick out certain people, from our audience, from our board, who have pictures or videos or like really neat descriptions of like that rare bird alert we all saw on eBird, or, something about being on a particular park, on a particular path. And it's also something to say, okay, here are the birds you can see this month. Here are the birds you should look out for, as we head into fall migration, when we get to that point. And I think that's something that like can exist as a video, whether that's a 3-minute thing or a 30-minute thing, that a birder or, birder adjacent, a birder soon to be, a fledgling birder, if you will, that could be their video. Like, okay, if these are the birds I could see, where would I go see them? And then if where is the where that you suggested, and XYZ, they have a good experience there, maybe they're a birder now, I don't know. But having those resources of, you can be a birder, I think that's what it is too. You can be a birder by yourself. You don't need to be a birder with us, I think is something that has to be like the implied narrative behind it too. Like, you don't have to be an Audubon member to be a birder. I told a lot of people that during Black Birders Week, especially. They're like, no, you don't need to, you can, and I would suggest joining, because like that's fun. Like in my head, it's fun being around other birders, but you don't have to. And if birding is the thing that you do with yourself, by yourself, or just with your family, that's awesome too. Like, you should keep that. It's just giving, I think the birding community, like the organizations and the clubs, have a responsibility, especially now, to have those resources available, and making them as local as possible means, it's the work that can be done with the folks on this call right now. Because, when people, even in Philadelphia, if we just talk about birding in Philly, there'll be people like, okay, what about Northeast Philly? Or what about South Philly? And it's just like, okay, well, that's a good point. Yeah, what about them? Let's talk about those birding habitats, because there's plenty. And they're really local. And I think that can be a very effective message too, that birding is something that you can do independently, and it's something that you can do very locally. In the coronavirus world that we live in, might be, the best thing, because it's more than just a walk in the park. It's a walk in the park with every person or every bird if you know them. And if you don't know them, you'll know them soon, maybe, and that's fun too.
Thank you very much. And if you or anybody here ever wants to do a walk in the Trenton Marsh with us, you are more than welcome to. It's great birding, and it's in the city of Trenton. Thanks, Tykee.
I just came from Liberty City Park on Sunday.
Is that right?
Point? Yeah.
Great.
Oh, can I jump in real quick? Is that okay?
I'm
okay.
done.
Okay, cool. Hi, really nice to meet you. I'm also something of an interloper. So I'm out in Chester County, but I'm actually an intern working for the Bucks County Courier-Times this summer. And I was super excited to find out that this talk was happening, because I actually saw the social media hashtag and thought that was super cool. So yeah, I was actually just wondering, you touched on a really important point earlier, which is that, it can be like unsafe for some people, like in certain neighborhoods, from a racial standpoint, to be birders. And I'm just wondering, what the kind of changes, if any, have been as a result of that social media hashtag, or if you've seen any changes happen.
I have daydreamed before that, I would get recognized in the field. They're like, wait, you're one of the Black birders. And then I would wonder, like, do they just mean like I'm one of the Black birders, or do they mean I'm one of the Black Birders Week birders? You know, like, I don't know how I would take that. But since I broke my ankle in January, my bird walking has been very limited. So I just have not been able to get out that much. And with face masks and everything, I don't even know if they would recognize, you know, whatever's going on here. That being said, I think that there has been a lot more conversations like this with local groups that have given opportunity for these groups to be very introspective and how their brand of inclusivity gives them this brand of diversity, and asking the questions of what can we do to make this more diverse, or really questions of what do we need to do to be more inclusive. And I think that where that inclusion takes place, those discussions take place, they take place with the board, they take place with the volunteer coordinator. But when what those can look like, you know, this can look like really creative ideas, like doing the things over Zoom. You know, those look like the creative ideas, or advancing the narrative that birding is a rolling admissions basis, and that you can bird independently, and you know, and it can be something that you do to engage with nature. It doesn't have to be you join my club to be a birder. I think that also, I think that this new culture of inclusivity, this new standard of diversity for the birding community, demands that we, you know, advance that narrative that you can be a birder without being in the bird club. And you can be a birder without having binoculars. You can be a birder without even knowing all the birds. One thing I would love to see from a culture point of view is a remake of The Big Year. I really think they could update it. I watched it the other day, and they were using phones that didn't have maps. And I was like, wow, we've come a long way, not just as a birding community, but as a people. So I think that movie needs an update, because what birders, or what the birding community represents, I think, in the national conversation today, I think we represent a very important stakeholder group to outcomes in conservation, but as well as outcomes in social justice. And those are for the birding groups that are in cities as well as the ones that are in the counties. I think that there can be something special. I mean, I think it's very obvious that there's something special, that birding can bring so many people together in so many different areas, in so many different ways. Taking the birding groups, taking the responsibility to meet the moment where we know we need more diversity, where we know we should be more inclusive, I think is going to, I don't think I'm going to see, I feel like I'm going to live in a generation, or at least in my lifetime, I'm going to see that change in culture of the expectations of a more inclusive birding community having the reality. And it's not anything that we are chasing for, but it is now something that is present. And it could, because it is ongoing. You know, I don't think that there will just be a single point that you've reached the summit and then that's it, you've won. Making it the muscle memory and the practice that it needs to be will keep your organization and will keep the birding community sustainable for the next generation.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it was so interesting to see people having those conversations, especially on social media. And I'm also, just as a follow-up question, I'm curious if you feel like, because you were so involved in that campaign, like if you think that that campaign is reaching the audience, or like the subsection of the audience that you think is like going to be impactful. I don't know if that makes sense as a question.
It does. So one of the things that came from Black Birders Week is a lot of pledges, public statements from a lot of environmental nonprofit organizations like the National Audubon Society, that I think will exist as a focal point that history will look at as the fork in the road of where this organization made this statement, and then their actions went this way, or their actions went this way. I think Black Birders Week really helped push some of those environmental organizations to take a path that was in the walkity walk of the talkity talk they provided. And some organizations did really well. Some organizations left more to be desired. But I think every organization should learn that it's not about the statements or the swag or the retweets. It's about change in policy, and it's about changing the culture of conservation. And part of that is reducing harm and admitting fault where it has been done. And where I think local groups have the attention to that point is exactly where I'm talking about being inclusive and being local and thinking interpersonally about how your experience in the field has been, you know, what you love about birding, and how that should also be the activity, that should also be the experience of anybody else who wants to participate in this. I think that Black Birders Week also made it clear that, you know, again, environmental progress cannot be achieved if you're not actively seeking to be anti-racist, and if you're not, you know, understanding that your entire objective is unsustainable. If you don't understand, even just from the statistical point, by 2050 the white majority in the United States will be a minority, and there will be more people of color in the United States, you know, by that time. And that's the generation that's going to be looking at us today to say, well, they made this statement here, and these were their actions, and this is where they led. And I just hope that this is something that they can be proud of, and we can be shoulders that they can stand on.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Of course, that was a great question.
So, Tykee, many of the birders are definitely progressive, and they may be thinking that, you know, I am progressive.
You just went mute on us.
Can you hear me?
Yes, the last thing I heard you say was birders being progressive.
Yeah. So many of the birders are progressive and inclusive. I mean, whatever their political ideology is, they are very nice and inclusive people. So they might think that, what's the difference? Probably you can put it in your perspective. Why Black Birders Week, and why is it important, and what should they be contributing? How do they help?
Well, well-meaning, I've learned this, well-meaning liberals don't mean salvation, so to speak. I think Get Out, if anyone's seen the movie Get Out, that's a really good interpretation of the well-meaning white liberal, and how that doesn't necessarily mean anything if it comes down to, you know, actively seeking to be anti-racist. So, you know, on the political ideology, Democrats and Republicans alike should know that if they are not representative of the, you know, Democratic majority, then, and I say Democrat as in, like, you know, the voting majority, you know, then they're going to realize too that they're not going to be relevant, and they're not going to be sustainable for the next generation. So it's the folks that hold on to the status quo, and it's the groups that hold on to the status quo that are going to sink, not float. And again, when we're looking at what groups can do and what individuals can do, I think that, you know, there are a lot of creative outcomes that can come from this, but moving money, you know, sometimes you donate to things, but sometimes you don't donate. Sometimes you're just giving money, not getting the tax refund back or the tax deductible. And that was, it's a concept that I'm favoring because I learned about this thing called community-centric fundraising, which is a movement to change the way fundraising works in this country so that it can be done with the social justice lens. Communitycentricfundraising.org has a lot more information on that. But from Black Birders Week, people just gave me money in my Venmo, like randomly, very randomly, non-honorarium, just like, hey, good job with the week. And I was like, huh, this may not address the national inequality that exists between, you know, haves and have-nots, but, you know, putting some some of this idea of value into my work from the birding community helps me make this message more public, helps me make this message reach out more, so that hopefully there can be more diversity in the movement. There can be more inclusivity. There can be folks that want to be champions for what the birding generation can and should be. And obviously, I take it as an investment because, you know, for the hours that I put into Black Birders Week, sleepless nights, so many sleepless. I feel like that week lasted a month, but we're on the other side of that, and that's okay. But yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just thinking about the flashbacks. The week also made it clear that Black women have a very, very important role as well in being supported to really make this movement move. Most of the organizers of Black Birders Week are Black women. And if it was not for them, we would not have had the structure upon which the other pro-Black led weeks that we're seeing now, you know, down the line. So we owe great gratitude to the Black women of that organizing week, but I think that that is also reflected in U.S. history and movements, but it's also, you know, I think and I want to say that it's more than a badge of honor, but I think it is a marker of, or a barometer of change when we see Black women in leadership, that we can see that, okay, we are really developing a movement if we can have Black women leading it, you know. And when we're fighting against that, that's holding on to the status quo. And again, that status quo is not going to be sustainable for the birding community. Now, that isn't to say that, like, tomorrow you need a Black woman president. Maybe tomorrow we're going to have a Black woman vice president. I don't know. I'm not in that conversation, but those can't be your expectations, nor should that be your intentions, just to have a Black face in leadership. So, you know, really think about how your interpersonal experience with the birding community can cultivate relationships that ultimately lead to the birding community we can and should see in the future.
When you spoke earlier, you mentioned the well-meaning liberals, and it kind of reminds me of the difference between not being racist and being anti-racist. And that's the step we need to take. And I think, I guess that's what we need to understand as an organization, as two organizations here, or what are the things that we can do to take that next step and be anti-racist, and what do you see as those differences?
Well, some of the things require context, right? If I wanted to start a birding group in Philadelphia, I think the first thing that I would have is understanding of people's relationship to the parks, because people's relationship to the parks is the history of our city and will be the history of our birding community if I were to make one in Philly in particular. And I would then try to cultivate the best storytellers of that history, because it may be traumatic to go through some chapters of history that you'd rather not read out loud. That's totally understandable. But it does take a respectable amount of accountability to humble yourself as an organization or as an institution and show your growth. It is something that, you know, folks feel vulnerable about. But I think Audubon had a really great example of it in their strategic plan. I used to carry the book with me everywhere because I would reference it so much. But in their strategic plan, it was the last page. Actually, I think I wrote it down instead of just trying to remember it off the top of my head. But it had a list of things called things we won't do anymore. Man, I can't. I'm terrible at finding things in this computer. Just believe me, I'm not a millennial. I am a millennial, I'm just kidding. But Audubon had a list of things that they would stop doing, and some of the reasons that they stopped doing them is because it became low priority with, you know, sucking up a lot of resources. But other reasons why is because their values changed. Their vision for what the birding community should be changed, and they were honest about that. They said, this is what we thought was an idea. This is what we thought was the answer. These were the outcomes of that decision, of these actions, of this initiative, and it didn't meet what we needed. We recognize that now. So we're going to stop doing this, and we're going to do something else. Or we're going to modify that thing, because even though it didn't give us the outcomes that we want, it's a really, really good vehicle to get us down the road a little further. And when you're thinking about how you get down that road further, think about how your board members should be a lot more diverse than the actual birding community. I think that Audubon chapters especially can take an opportunity to think about how their board can benefit from non-birders, and how their board can benefit from folks that maybe are more adjacent to birding, like kayaking people. Kayakers, I guess, maybe that's what, I don't know. See, I don't see, that's my thing too. Like, I don't know what else people do outside. I'm so used to watching birds. I think that, you know, it would benefit me in my thinking of my creativity if there are more folks who could have a complete experience of the outdoors, or a more complete experience of living in the city, a more complete experience of the history of the parks. Again, that's such an important thing when you're trying to break down those barriers, or trying to show that you can be a lot more inclusive. It's definitely having that self-awareness, that personal and institutional self-awareness of, excuse me, what you should know, and what your constituents or what the community that you're serving also knows. Ooh, also this idea, this happened in Philly. It still could be happening, I don't know. But Bird Philly, which is an initiative that was, you know, kind of brought up between DVOC, Audubon, Pennsylvania, and Windcote Audubon, where a birding backpack you could get lent out to you from the library, just like a library book. And in the birding backpack, it had a field guide. This is why we have props. This is not from, I didn't steal this from the, wait, now that I think about it, I should clarify that's not from the birding backpack, that is my personal one. But it came with a field guide, a pair of binoculars, and a map of the park. And you could, you know, lend that out, get that for a couple days, get that for a week. And that was only made possible because those groups put their money together. And it's ultimately an investment, you know, because there's no telling how many birders that are now existing because of that. And, you know, it was also very much taken seriously, the process of making sure the birding backpack looked legit, and making sure the binoculars were legit, and the map, and you know, so it's like a comfortable thing that you can literally pick up at your own pace and just start birding, you know, starting at your local library and going to your local park.
That's a great idea, Tykee.
Yeah, I used it a bunch of times. I did bird walks with my friends when I didn't have enough binoculars that I could steal from Audubon. I didn't really steal, don't tell anybody. I could just go to the library and be like, hey, let's rent out an extra backpack with some, you know, with a field guide, because I also didn't have a field guide at the time either. And it was just like a really good way. Also, you know, at the time, it was a cool little date move. You know, it's just like, oh, let's go to a local library, pick up our local, you know, binoculars, and go to our local park and watch our local birds. I mean, for me, it would be a date. I never really did it, but it was always fun when I did it. I didn't really care if anybody went with me. That's an idea of that takes a lot of concepts together, you know, working with different groups. All of these groups were mostly white organizations, but what they did in effect was, you know, that narrative of, you don't have to join my bird club to be a birder. You can literally start birding at your local library. You can literally start birding at your local park. If it helped, in what you did was just facilitate the opportunity. I have an idea for federal engagement too. So, how many people have seen the Audubon show I Saw a Bird? Show of hands. Nobody's seen it. Okay. So it's basically it's basically like a live late night show over Zoom where there's like segments and breakout. Oh, you've seen it. Okay, there you go. There you go. There's segments and like there's breakout rooms to do like different things, and then they can bring up a video. It's like, you know, a live TV show over Zoom. And I think that there's no copyright infringement on anyone to take that idea or take that format. Don't do the same name, I Saw a Bird. I hope you pick something a little more clever, like I saw a bird in Bucks County. Okay, that's not as much clever. But either way, either way, that's something that obviously can be used for membership engagement, because you can talk about the birds you've seen, and it can be something that you can do for new birders, where you could talk about birds you could see, where you could see them, what they look like, depending on this time of year, defining bird behaviors of that time, and then hearing from your local representative. And now we're going to hear from state representative, blah, 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 because they care about, or, obviously a member of Congress or a senator even. It's something that, can be used that, again, could be like a 5-minute thing, a 10-minute thing. It can be a 30-minute and an hour thing, depending on how much production and time you want to put into the concept. But it can be directed by your capacity and obviously by your creativity. But, I'm not short of it. So if you need more creativity, I can definitely see what else I have going on in the head. But that's something that I hope that everyone can do. And one of the things I do suggest for it is investing in sound, because people listen better when you sound, when you sound like you're in the room. Hey.
Hi, this is Cheryl Rizzo.
Hi, Cheryl.
I bird in the Churchville group, and I just want to mention that I Saw a Bird by Audubon is great. I did it throughout COVID. They had it special for the migration season, and it was every week. It was fantastic. In fact, I'm still doing it now, and it's once a month. Mm-hmm. Tomorrow, David Sibley is going to be speaking, and one of the photographers for National Geographic and the Audubon Society too, she was also going to speak. So it was a great format, and I wish everyone had the opportunity to do it. You still can actually through the Audubon Society to join up for it. So that was a great suggestion. Thanks.
Absolutely. If you look on Audubon's Facebook page, you can see the I Saw a Bird shows and kind of get an idea for how that is. And I really think, this is something that you can really invest your time and have fun in. If you ever thought you could be a late night talk show host, this is it. Especially, think about it. If there was a late night talk show for birders, what would it be like? You could have, just think about the owl jokes. That alone is an episode. There's just so many things. Obviously, I'm going to think about doing it to lobby because I'm a lobbyist. But doing it for fun is also important. And also members of Congress like having fun too. Elected officials like having fun, If you can get your mayor to have, here's an example. If you know that your mayor or the superintendent, depending on the size of your city, has a bird feeder in their backyard, what if you just made sure you gave them a segment to do a check-in? Like, hey, now we're going to hear from Mayor Bridge about the birds. And then it's going to be the bridge to, Mayor Bridge segment. I don't know why I said Mayor Bridge. It just makes sense to say bridge as a segment to go to the mayor. And then the mayor would be like, these are the birds I saw in my window. Next. And, so it could just be so many things that helps you develop access points to those decision makers and really cultivate a relationship where you can have meaningful conversations about policy or have meaningful conversations about how to address the problems that you both agree to in the community.
Okay, it's I think 8 o'clock. Probably people are running out of questions, I guess. Tykee, thanks a lot for sharing your experience, and it's wonderful to have you here. It's a wonderful conversation that we have. I got a couple of ideas that from your talk.
Yeah, I
which
saw a
I'm
bunch
planning.
of folks like right now. I'm like, yes, good.
Right.
Well, thank you,
This is
iPad 3, Sharon.
so I think, a couple of things that you said is definitely resonating with us. How do we break the barriers, being watchful and understanding how this individual conversations work and all of those things. Definitely the bird fully concept and the I saw a bird concept definitely resonates well to recruit new birders and young birders and things like that. So it's great. Thanks a lot. I think Melina wants to have a couple of questions, post this call. So we'll stay on and have, she wants to interview you.
Yeah, I'm free. I'm free for whatever.
Yeah, thank you so much. No, I obviously also don't want to take your time, but like too much, a little bit.
I had coffee. I was ready. This is my second wind.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, and I guess anyone from the organization as well who would be willing to talk. I'm very new to the whole birding scene. I have some binoculars right here.
Nice.
But I'm very novice. So I don't know much about what the community is like in Bucks either. So I'd love to just hear from anyone about what your experience has been, particularly with diversity in the organization and how it has felt in this moment, as you mentioned, Tykee, like kind of a little bit of a reckoning moment. But yeah, maybe that would be a good place to start if anyone wants to share.
I'll say that with my experience with Bucks County Audubon and Bucks County Birders, it was in relation to Representative Brian Fitzpatrick, who is Audubon's BFF. Oh no, a thumbs down from Sharon. Oh, Sharon's not a fan. Oh no. Well, he co-sponsors a lot of environmental bills, things that are good for birds. So we do thank him for that. Outside of that, I don't know him that much. And I will say this, he's in DC, so he's not around his constituents. He's, around lobbyists like me and all those rooms that people talk about. And he talks about that time that he went birding with Bucks County Audubon. He talks about that with pride. And he talks about how he can literally be outside talking to someone and then see a bird and be like, did you see that? And then no one else saw it, but they think it's his CIA training that gives him that special awareness for birds. And it's just like, no, it's not the CIA thing. So that's my experience with Bucks County Audubon.
Well, we had a fabulous time with him on his bird walk.
Yeah.
The county has a lot of good nature centers that have walks. I don't know if Peace Valley is still doing theirs, but when my son was 12, we searched around for a bird walk and started going to Churchville, and the birders there latched onto him, especially because he was young with good eyes and good ears, and anytime he lifted his binoculars, they went, oh, what's he looking at? That they've been a great community. And Melina, is it Melina?
Yep.
You should come on some Saturday morning. We're in the summers at 7 a.m. And we'll get you going.
Yeah, I had this very similar feeling with what Barbara is saying. I joined Churchville about maybe a couple of years ago, and my son, who is 11 years old, they just embraced us. And there is a lot of knowledge in that group. And I learned a lot from walking Churchville. And that opened up a lot of other opportunities, the places that they go to. And then I also joined many talks with Washington Crossing the other day, and things like that opened up because you join a club, and it has a lot of knowledge. People embrace new birders a lot with enthusiasm. They wanted to show things, with the old birders, that's a crested flycatcher, they don't care, but the new birders definitely care. So there are a lot of questions. So for the new birders, joining a club is really enjoying experience. I would definitely encourage you to do that.
Yeah, really cool. I'm wondering how, some of you old timers, I guess, but not really, but like how you got interested in joining a bird club in the first place, or like how you've seen it change over time if you've been there for a long time.
I've been only 2 years, 3 years maybe. Others should talk. I'm not that old. I don't want to.
I'm old enough. We expanded. My son got completely addicted, and I had grown up being aware of birds and having them pointed out to us as kids, but not really realizing how much is beyond your backyard bird feeder. So really, once you get hooked, that's when it takes off. And so really it's kind of a matter of finding the right person that can introduce you to it so that it really has that meaning. And you want to wake up at the crack of dawn and go do that. But I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if there has ever been a sort of reckoning like this before, or any, or is this the first time that the community is really having this conversation?
Well, after Blackbirders Week, we really thought it was important to make a statement. Our board is more diverse than it ever has been, but the community isn't terribly diverse. And so we'd hate to think that we were a part of the problem. So just having the discussion we thought was a step in the right direction. It's an awareness thing. Anybody else? I don't want to hog.
No, I think I actually inspired by what DVOC did, and the statement is very important. As Tykee said, right, we are in a time where we had to do something actively. So that's when I think we wanted to put out a statement, and it's nothing political, right? It's about being what is right at that time of the history. Which side of the history you are. And so we wanted to put out a statement and have a conversation. I think someone else told that, if we have 11% of the population is Black, then probably we may have to bring in 11% of the time we have to bring in other people to the talks that we have. So we kind of thinking through this, and we don't know what it is yet. So we're kind of experimenting. So this is the first meeting that we have on this topic, and probably we will be more watchful to see, what we call, and make sure that we actively take steps to be inclusive, I would say.
Yeah, or maybe, that's great. I think for you too, Tykee, like being in Philly, I'm wondering if it's like, this might sound like a just novice question, but whether like sort of suburban groups have almost had to like catch up to conversations that city birding groups have been having for a longer time. Like, would you say that that's the case?
Yeah, I mean, it's the case from the idea of I was kind of already ahead because my birding was my job. I bird with my neighbor, so most of the people that I birded with were Black and young, or much older, because it was like grandparents taking care of grandkids. So it was never like somebody my age either, or somebody that was like an adult to me as a teenager. It would either, it was like grandparents' age or kids' age. Those were most of my bird walks when I got started. And the idea of inclusivity for me was understanding the context that I'm in the park with my neighbors, in reference to the move bombing and in reference to the history of police violence, because there's no way that folks are going to feel included in the park if we're ignoring the history that we all know we shared, or ignoring trauma that has yet to be remedied, honestly. I definitely think that, oh, go ahead, Cheryl.
I'm sorry. I just want to mention that I'm going to do a shout out for Churchville also. And for me, I'm a late bloomer. It has nothing to do with race with me. I started just learning about birds and I'm in my 60s. So they had talk about inclusivity. They were great to me and still are. And I'm not a child, but I'm older and I'm learning from the very bottom up. And I think it's important, the people, the group that you're with, like Ben said, there are a lot of experienced people in that group and they're willing to share. It doesn't matter who you are or how old you are. And his son and me are perfect examples of that, from young to old and beyond even race at all. And I just wanted to mention that, like I said, a shout out to Churchville. They've been great to me. So
that's incredible. Having good examples of inclusivity should make you ask yourself as an organization, what are we doing to make those folks feel included? What can we do more to make more of those folks feel included? And start to figure out, okay, if we're doing this, what are we doing that's excluding people? Because maybe the way we include them excludes them. And we're an organization that's meant to be serving everyone.
Right.
You know, so like, it is good to get those wins, figure out what those good things are, and then also look introspectively into like, okay, is this a strength? Is this an opportunity? Is this a weakness? Is this a threat? Like, where are we with these things that we're doing and the things that we're hearing from our members that we're doing that they like? You know, like that's all good feedback that can be used in a lot of potentially creative ways.
Tykee, did you have something else to say about, you were saying something about Philadelphia and parks?
Oh, yeah. It's harder to be discriminatory or racially discriminatory in Philadelphia for the most part because everyone, 40% of the population is POC, person of color. And so anti-Black racism or anti-immigrant racism or colorism, all those things can still exist, within, a marginalized community. And I'm not saying that doesn't exist at all, but having the alienation of like white supremacy, like without having white supremacy front and center as the target of, or at least the source of discrimination, it for me, it's been easier to go where I felt comfortable in Philadelphia because it was just like, well, at least I feel that I'm around folks that look like me that to some extent have the same experience. So if they do see me birding, yeah, it's kind of weird, but they're not going to call the cops on me, like they do see me birding. They may think it's weird, but like their grandkid will be like, oh, that's Mr. James. He took me on a bird walk with my school group the other day. And then the mom will be like, oh, I'm like, yeah, I know it's weird. It's your young child recognizes an older person, but it's for birds. And then, then that becomes the interesting conversation of like, oh, you were doing that at summer camp or, whatever it is. And, again, it goes back to how your experience, how your experience as a birder has been great and what you've appreciated about that, and thinking that can exist for so many other people in so many other ways. What can I do to facilitate that, And sometimes you can't break down some of those barriers. Like I can't change history. I can't, remove the trauma. I'm not the remedy to the trauma. If anything, I might even, some people might see me as a distraction. But what I ultimately did, and part of what it was my job to do is that I organized a community around the importance of a park and the importance of having a relationship with the park. Excuse me. So, that was, I guess, my mission, as a person. And I would always seek to do that no matter who was living in there. And I would try to figure out ways that everyone could have an experience at that park that was really good as long as they were with me,
Yeah. Thank you so much. And thank all of you for sharing your experience. Was there anything I didn't ask about that any of you would want to share, or that, Bucks County Courier Times readers should know about this discussion? Or not related?
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
I just tuned in. My name's Grant Stevenson. I'm calling from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. I'm a member of the Lehigh Valley Audubon Society, but I do not represent them. How important, I was reading Ibram X. Kendi's book, How to Be Anti-Racist, and at the end he lists 8 steps, and the first step is for white people to more or less accept that they are they benefited from more than 400 years of white privilege and worse, and to admit they're racist, and they have benefited from their, well, more or less, and I'm not sure I want to accuse anybody, but I've accepted that more or less in me, and also to admit we benefited from that white privilege. And I want to ask, how important is urban birding, unless it's already been addressed, to the mental health of, I believe it's helped me, to the mental health of urban birders, particularly those of color.
Grant, thank you so much for mentioning that thing about being anti-racist. It is a hard pill to swallow. I mean, to be honest with you, sometimes I benefit from racism, and that really sucks. And I realize that as I am the oppressed, I can also have a role as the oppressor. And that's why I think it's so important to demonstrate radical accountability and radical change to reduce harm, because like I said, I can't be the remedy to trauma. I'm not. And birding, some people may see that as a distraction from that trauma, but I would hope that it is, like I said from the beginning, it's something that can help with your relationship with nature as you engage with it, not something that you take away from nature. And I think that somebody hit on it too. It does depend on how you start. It does depend on who and I think that almost everybody has a story of who got them into birding. Not a lot of people have stories about like how they were just like, oh, I just saw this thing that had feathers and I just knew all of them after that. Like not a lot of people, but that's still an incredible story if that's the case. But that's why it's just so important to know about the stories and know about the histories of parks, knowing about the histories of the peoples of those parks, and knowing that the birding community has in my opinion, a very important role in leading what that should look like, or leading the culture of conservation to something that needs to be more inclusive, and something that's a lot more representative of the folks that can enjoy and that will enjoy the hope-giving activity that is birding. When it comes down to the mental health aspect, I mean, I'm sure that somebody, history has already been made on the doctor who wrote a prescription for take a walk in the park. I think that that's kind of like a baseline understanding of, yeah, we know that fresh air, clean, parks and managed lands are healthy for us physically and that word. So I would think that the mental health benefits, are may not always accessible by everyone every time that they go birding, but I think birding as an experience can be something that, as you engage with nature and have that relationship, it can be, another, potential resource in your mental toolbox of things that keep you calm, things that present you with some form of tranquility, because it's, again, something that you have a relationship with and engage with, and not just something you consume.
I want to chime in on that point, Tykee, right? So when I started birding, it was just kind of a time pass. But I think the more and more that I hooked on, it opened up a lot of windows. So today, in my family, at least in my workplace and community, I think I know more of not just birds, the insects, the trees, the native plants and invasive plants. It's kind of you become, eventually become naturalist, not just a birder.
Yeah.
And it's also very spiritual as well. Like once a week, I go with church bill, and sometimes I go alone, and it's really
So
opens up a lot
emphasizing
of
the
doors.
church in Churchville as the religious experience.
That is
You did that on
definitely
purpose.
We have state and church separate. I mean, that's Churchville, where we don't do any. That's our religion. Birding is our religion.
Yeah,
I would
there
say
you go.
that.
There you go. Yeah, no, that's a very good point. Actually, the Center for Spirituality and Nature, I did a program with them last week. It was called God's Eye on the Sparrow, which is a biblical reference that I have not studied enough to reference, but I know it's one. I know it's in there. But it was a very open dialogue about how spirituality in this moment with our relationship to nature can be part of what defines this for us, and for me, birding and my relationship with spirituality was something that I was really happy to talk about and explore, because it was kind of on that idea of this is a place that I can go, and this is like something that I can build for myself that is my understanding of the questions that I may not have the answers to, but the things that I enjoy and engage with daily. I mean, I think I bird daily.
Well, thank you all.
That's a great beard.
I wanted to say that I find that birding increases my good brain chemicals.
Ooh. We like those.
Yeah.
That's the most concise way to say it. Can we just have that as like a t-shirt somewhere? Birding increases my good brain chemicals. I like that.
That'd be great.
As long as we're talking about diversity and Churchville, I'm going to put in a plug for the Lenape Village.
Hey!
Because once COVID is over, we're going to be reopening the village. It's a pre-contact village, so like 400 years ago. Wow. And we do public programs, and it's all hands-on. It's a great place to bring kids, but it's a great place for adults too, because they get to play.
Yes.
So, yeah, before COVID, we were seeing about 16,000 kids a year. One of the things we had hoped to do was pull the money together so we could bring kids in from Philadelphia who couldn't afford to come. Mm-hmm. But we get a lot of diversity. We get kids coming over from Trenton for the program. So when COVID's over, maybe in the spring, please join us.
Yeah,
nice.
I'll definitely take that. Wow.
I should also mention that the Bucks Audubon does bird walks on Saturdays.
Nice. Every Saturday?
The first and third Saturday of each month at 8 a.m. Not quite as early as Churchill.
So actually on the idea of bird walks, I want to share my screen on this thing that I made. And be very kind. It's a very, very rough draft. But this is like a thing that I made that's like a description of leading a bird walk or leading an inclusive bird walk. Maybe, I don't know. I don't have a full title of it. Is it easy to see? Is it, okay. I just hope. But you basically, you have your group in the middle, you have your field guide folks, you have your pointers, and then you have your orator, and I think that if you are one person, you should have all three of these roles, basically, right? But it's also a way to develop leadership and create a pipeline of involvement so that, maybe, it's the kids that are really good at pointing, and it's just like, okay, when they point, the orator stops talking, the field guides go to the page, and then we figure out, and everybody does their part of figuring out what the bird is, telling people what the bird is, explaining some of the behavior, just like the stuff that you would do. But I just think institutionalizing it as like this sort of format really makes it easy to see that, like, okay, this is a birding organization that if I want to be a part of, I can see myself, maybe I want to hold the field guide one day. I want to be in charge of making sure when we stop and talk about a bird, or we're looking for the bird, we hear a bird, that I have the page open and I can help point it out and, show what some of the features are. While the orator perhaps talks about, it doesn't always have to be about birds either. The orator could be like a special guest who does botany and talks about all the native plants. The orator could be, a historian who could share the history of the park and, other stories. And again, there can be so many different ways that you can do this. This is just I think, a board upon which to put your charcuterie. If anybody's a fan of cured meats and cheeses. I wouldn't mind sending this around as a picture if that's what the people want, but
sure.
Very rough draft.
Tykee, if you're willing, I would love to get in touch. I'm actually about to start a 1-year master's program in environmental communication, and I have to do a project sometime next year, basically like doing some kind of like consulting / like I provide my time and help to an organization. So if you're at all interested in getting in touch, I would be super interested.
Okay, bet. What do I have to do to get your contact information?
I could just send it in the chat if you want.
Please and thank you.
Cool. Thank you.
Opportunity. Bam. That's how it happens. Moving. I used to say that a lot during Black Birders Week. I'd be like, how's the week going? And I'd be like, well, we're moving at the speed of opportunity. Oh, you go to Stanford? Oh my God, I know so many. Well, I guess it's because I'm in DC. There's just so many people that are from Stanford that like are interning in the environment. And it's just like, yeah, it's Stanford. It's a good thing though. It's a good thing. It means, they know how to get professionals in the field.
They really just pump them out there like it's like a factory. But yeah. Oh, I guess everyone has my contact now, but yeah, and I can send you the article when it's done. So
please.
Did you know Professors Terry Root and Steve Snyder at Stanford at all? I think they left possibly before you came, but they were climate ornithologists.
I don't know them specifically. I could list off a few names of professors I've worked with if anyone's interested.
Terry might still be on the board of Audubon. I don't know.
Who will? Sorry.
Terry Root.
Oh, okay. The names maybe sound familiar, but I don't know. I haven't started my program yet, so
He passed away, but Terry lives in Florida now.
Okay.
Very much still involved.
Yeah. Well, while I was doing my undergrad, I actually took a class at the local biological preserve called Jasper Ridge. I don't know if any of you have heard of it, but it's where Paul Ehrlich did some research. So I don't know if that means anything to anyone, but yeah. But thank you all so much for being so generous with your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
no problem.
Anything else?
You're welcome.
Hey, Tykee, thanks a lot for joining. I think it was a wonderful conversation with you. I think many of us learned a lot. We shared some of our insights as well. I think I'll probably contact you for some other ideas as well. You mentioned a few things that I wanted to learn about, so we'll do that.
I would be happy to provide more background on things because I think I just kind of gave a 30,000-foot view of a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Because a lot of it does depend on certain context and circumstance. And, I do have experience with navigating bureaucracy as well as coordinating legislative strategies. So when it comes down to like, oh, we got to figure out how to get this passed by the board, I've, or at least it has been my job to literally like put down whose votes we can count on if it comes down to that, and exactly what language we need to get the bill passed. But sometimes just having a nice conversation can prevent us going to the Excel sheet, targets and empirical stuff. But yeah, I'd be happy to help out in any way that I can. You know, like
Yeah,
I said,
sure.
I love doing this stuff. I think the birding community is going to be really important to the future, and I'm happy to be a part of it in any way.
Sounds great. All right, I got to learn. Thanks a lot. And Stacy, as always, thanks a lot for sharing this Zoom meeting. And you have the recording that we can send it tomorrow, right?
Yep, I will email it to you as soon as it comes through.
All right, cool. Thanks. So.
Right.
Bye.
Thank you so much, Tykee.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody.
Good night.
This has been incredible.
Good night.
Good night.